06:55 hours, November 8, 1942. The skies over Casablanca. The altimeter reads 8,000 feet. The air is cold. The sun is just beginning to bleed over the horizon of French Morocco, turning the Atlantic Ocean into a sheet of hammered copper. Inside the cockpit of a Grumman F-4F Wildcat, an American Navy pilot grips the stick. His knuckles are white. His breath fogs the glass. He is part of Operation Torch, the massive Allied invasion of North Africa. He has been briefed to expect resistance. He has been told to watch for the angular, predatory shapes of German Messerschmitts or the heavy, lumbering frames of Italian bombers. He checks his 6. Clear. He checks his 3. Clear. He looks down at the beachhead. Smoke is already rising. Then he sees it. A silhouette diving from the clouds at the 10 o'clock position. It is small, it is agile, it has the thick, pug-nosed cowling of a radial engine. The American pilot hesitates. The shape is familiar. It looks like a friend. It looks like home. It has the rounded wingtips and the distinct fuselage of a Curtiss fighter. For a split second, the American pilot thinks it's a stray P-40 Warhawk, or perhaps an older trainer that got lost in the scramble. He does not pull the trigger. He waits. That hesitation is a mistake. The diving plane rolls inverted. Tracer fire erupts from its nose. The bullets are .30 caliber. They walk across the Wildcat's left wing, shredding aluminum and severing hydraulic lines. The American plane shudders violently. The pilot fights the stick, but the sky is spinning. As the attacker screams past, the American catches a glimpse of the fuselage. He expects a swastika. He expects the rising sun. Instead, he sees the distinct red and yellow stripes of the Vichy Air Force. And beneath the paint, he recognizes the machine. It is a Curtiss P-36 Hawk. It was designed in Buffalo, New York. It was built by American hands. It was paid for with American steel, and now it is killing American men. This is not a case of friendly fire. This is not an accident. This is the dark, twisted irony of war. The plane that just crippled a modern U.S. Navy fighter is a ghost, a relic. A machine that the United States Army Air Corps declared a failure 5 years ago. They said it was too slow. They said it was obsolete. They sold it to the world and washed their hands of it. They were wrong. To understand how a rejected American prototype became the deadliest predator over North Africa, and how it ended up pointing its guns at its own creators, we have to stop the clock. We have to rewind the film. We have to leave the burning skies of 1942 and go back to a drafting table in a smoke-filled room in 1935. Back to when the world was still pretending to be at peace. 1935, Buffalo, New York, the Curtiss Wright Corporation. The Great Depression is strangling the American economy. Factories are silent. Men are hungry. But inside the brick walls of the Curtiss Wright plant, the lights stay on all night. Donovan Berlin is tired. He is the chief engineer, and he carries the weight of a dying company on his shoulders. Curtiss Wright was once the titan of aviation, the legacy of Glenn Curtiss, the man who raced trains and defied gravity. But now they are falling behind. Boeing is building monoplanes. The Europeans are experimenting with liquid-cooled engines. The biplane era is dead, and Curtiss is in danger of dying with it. Berlin knows he needs a miracle. He needs a fighter that can fly faster, climb higher, and turn tighter than anything the Army has ever seen. He looks at his sketches. He calls it Design 75. It is a radical departure. No more fabric. No more wood, no more wires whistling in the wind. This machine is all metal. It is a monocoque shell, stressed aluminum skin stretched over a skeleton of ribs and stringers. It is sleek, it is aggressive. But the real revolution is in the landing gear. Berlin knows that drag is the enemy. Every strut, every wheel, every bolt that sticks out into the airstream steals speed. He designs a mechanism that is pure engineering poetry. The wheels don't just fold up, they rotate 90 degrees, twisting flat before tucking backward into the wing. It is complex, it is heavy, but it makes the wing surface smooth as glass. Berlin works the numbers. He calculates the drag coefficients. He stares at the specs for the engine options. He is betting everything on the radial engine. The Army loves the radial. It is air-cooled. It is rugged. If you take a bullet in a cylinder, the engine keeps running. If you take a bullet in the radiator of a liquid-cooled engine, you bleed out coolant and seize up in minutes. Berlin bets on survivability. He bets on the radial. May 1935. The prototype flies. The Model 75 rolls out onto the tarmac. It glimmers in the spring sun. It looks like the future. The test pilot climbs in. The engine coughs, catches, and roars. It is a Wright XR1675, pumping out 900 horsepower. The plane leaps off the ground. For a moment, it seems like Curtiss has won. The plane is fast. It handles like a dream. The controls are responsive, light to the touch. It dances in the air. Berlin watches from the ground, his heart hammering against his ribs. This is the savior of the company. This is the plane that will defend America. But history is rarely that simple. The United States Army Air Corps announces a competition, a fly-off. Winner takes all. The contract is for the next generation of pursuit aircraft. Curtiss brings the Model 75, but a rival has emerged. Alexander Seversky, a Russian expatriate with a flair for the dramatic and a design called the P-35. The competition is a disaster for Curtiss. The prototype Model 75 is plagued by bad luck. The engine is unreliable. The performance is good, but the price tag is high. The Army is broke. They are counting pennies. Seversky's plane is cheaper. It is slightly slower, but it is cheaper. The judges deliberate. The tension in the Curtiss boardroom is suffocating. The verdict comes down like a hammer. The Army delays. They are unimpressed. They order the Seversky P-35 into production. Curtiss is left holding the bag. They are given a consolation prize, an order for 3 prototypes to continue testing. It is a slap in the face. Donovan Berlin does not quit. He goes back to the drawing board. He rips the engine out of the prototype. He replaces the Wright engine with a Pratt & Whitney R1830 Twin Wasp, 1,050 horsepower, 2 rows of cylinders screaming in unison. He refines the canopy. He smooths the rivets. In 1937, the Army takes another look. The world is getting darker. Hitler is rearming Germany. The Luftwaffe is flying the Bf-109. The Spanish Civil War is proving that speed and firepower are the only things that matter. The U.S. Army realizes they have made a mistake. The Seversky P-35 is underpowered. It is falling behind. They come back to Curtiss. They order 210 aircraft. They designate it the P-36 Hawk. It should have been a triumph. It was the largest peacetime order for fighter aircraft in American history. The newspapers ran headlines. The factory in Buffalo roared to life. Men were hired. Steel was cut. The P-36A began to roll off the assembly line. But there was a problem, a fatal flaw in the timing. By the time the P-36 entered service with the 20th Pursuit Group at Barksdale Field in 1938, it was already a ghost. Aviation technology was moving at the speed of light. In Germany, the Messerschmitt Bf-109E was already flying faster. In England, the Supermarine Spitfire was taking shape. The P-36, with its 300-mile-per-hour top speed and its light armament, just one 30 caliber and one 50 caliber machine gun firing through the propeller arc, was already looking like an antique. The pilots of the 20th Pursuit Group liked the plane. It turned on a dime. It could outturn anything in the sky. It climbed like a rocket. But the brass in Washington looked at the numbers and shook their heads. It's not fast enough, they said. It doesn't have enough guns, they said. They looked at the P-36 and saw a stopgap, a placeholder. They were already dreaming of the next plane, the P-40 Warhawk. The P-40 was essentially a P-36 airframe with a big, heavy Allison liquid-cooled V-12 engine shoved into the nose. It was faster in a straight line. It was what the Army wanted. So the P-36 was pushed aside. It was labeled Limited Standard. That is military code for, we don't really want this. They sent them to training units. They sent them to remote outposts. They sent 39 of them to a sleepy naval base in the middle of the Pacific Ocean called Pearl Harbor, thinking they would be safe there, thinking they would never see combat. The U.S. Army Air Corps had made their decision. The P-36 was a failure, a dead end. But while America was turning its back on the Hawk, another nation was watching. A nation that could hear the sound of jackboots marching on its border. A nation that was desperate for anything that could fly and shoot. France. The French Air Force was in chaos. Their domestic industry was paralyzed by strikes and politics. Their planes were obsolete. They looked across the Atlantic and saw the P-36. They didn't see a failure, they saw a lifeline. They placed an order, a massive order. They called it the Hawk 75. The U.S. Army laughed. Why would anyone buy these cast-offs? Why would France bet their survival on a plane that America had already rejected? The engineers at Curtiss didn't ask questions, they just built the crates. They painted the instructions in French. They shipped the fighters to Europe just as the storm clouds were breaking. But as the first Hawk 75s arrived in France, sitting in crates on the docks, the engineers had missed something, a critical detail about the difference between American training and European combat: the throttle. In American planes, you push the throttle forward to go fast. You pull it back to slow down. It is intuitive, it is natural. In French planes, the throttle worked backward. You pulled back for power, you pushed forward to idle. It was a small mechanical difference, a few linkages, a few bolts. But in the heat of a dogfight, when instinct takes over and the brain shuts down, that difference is the difference between life and death. And the French pilots were about to climb into these American machines with their reversed throttles and their imperial gauges and fly straight into the teeth of the German Luftwaffe. The stage was set for a disaster, or so it seemed. The crate is open. The mechanic wipes the grease from the wing. The date is September 1939. The phony war is over. The real war has begun. And the failed American fighter is about to do something no one in Washington thought possible. It is about to hunt. May 10, 1940. The French-German border. The phony war is dead. The real war has arrived with the scream of a Stuka dive bomber. The German Wehrmacht pours across the border. Tanks, infantry, artillery. It is a tidal wave of steel. Above them, the Luftwaffe clears the sky. The Messerschmitt Bf 109E is the king of the air. It is fast. It is fuel-injected. It has cannons that can tear a bomber in half. The German pilots are confident. They have practiced in Spain. They have studied the intelligence reports. They know the French Air Force is disorganized. They know the French planes are slow. They expect a slaughter. But they forgot about the Americans, or rather, The American export. High above the Ardennes, a squadron of French pilots patrols the sector. They are flying the Curtiss Hawk 75. They are the groupe de chasse. They spot the Germans, a swarm of Bf-109s diving from the sun. The German tactic is simple: boom and zoom. Dive, fire, climb away. Use your speed. Do not turn. The French tactic is different. They know their machine. They know the Hawk 75 is slower. If they try to run, they die. If they try to climb, they die. So they do the one thing the Hawk does better than any plane on Earth. They turn. The lead German pilot lines up a Hawk. He pulls the trigger. His cannons thump. He misses. He pulls back on the stick to climb away, expecting the French plane to be left behind. He looks in his mirror. The Hawk is still there. This is the shock. This is the nasty surprise. The P-36, the plane the Americans rejected, has a wing loading that defies physics. It can turn inside a phone booth. The French pilot kicks the rudder. The Hawk snaps around. The radial engine roars. The G-force pushes the pilot into his seat, the blood draining from his head, his vision tunneling. But the plane holds the turn. It bites into the air. The German pilot cannot match it. His wings shudder. He is on the edge of a stall. The Hawk slides in behind him. The French pilot presses the trigger. 4 7.5mm machine guns chatter. They are small caliber, but they are precise. They stitch a line of holes across the Germans' fuselage. Glycol sprays. Smoke erupts. The failure has just drawn first blood. During the Battle of France, the Curtiss Hawk 75 became a legend. While the rest of the French military was collapsing, the Hawk pilots were racking up kills. They claimed 230 confirmed victories. Of those, the Hawk 75 alone accounted for nearly a third of all French aerial victories. 11 French pilots became aces flying this machine. Men like Camille Ploubeau and Marin La Meslay. They flew the Hawk until the ammunition ran out. They flew it until the fuel was gone. They flew it until the airfields were overrun by German tanks. The Germans were baffled. They captured French pilots and asked to see the plane. They looked at the radial engine. They looked at the thick wings. They couldn't understand how this obsolete American tub was shooting down the pride of the Luftwaffe. It was a triumph of engineering. It was proof that Donovan Berlin was right. But it didn't matter, because a fighter plane cannot win a war alone. June 22, 1940. Compiègne wagon. France surrenders. The government collapses. The armistice is signed. The pilots land their Hawks. They shut down the engines. They weep. They have not been defeated in the air. They have been defeated on the ground. And now the disaster truly begins. The Germans take inventory. They walk the flight lines. They see hundreds of Curtiss Hawk 75s. Some are damaged. Some are brand new, still smelling of factory paint. The Germans are pragmatic. They do not burn them. They do not crush them. They seize them. They paint over the French roundels. They stamp the paperwork. And then they make a decision that will haunt the Allies 2 years later. They allow the newly formed Vichy French government, the puppet regime collaborating with Hitler, to keep their air force. They allow them to keep the Hawks. Why? Because Hitler wants Vichy to defend the French colonies in North Africa against the British. He wants the French to do his dirty work. So the Hawks are sent south, to Morocco, to Algeria, to Dakar. They sit in the desert heat. The mechanics keep them oiled. The pilots, men who hate the Germans but are bound by duty to their commanders, run drills. They wait. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, another disaster is unfolding. A disaster that will prove, once and for all, that the P-36 was the victim of bad timing, not bad design. December 7, 1941. Oahu, Hawaii. 07:55 hours. The drone of engines breaks the Sunday morning calm. At Wheeler Army Airfield, the planes are lined up wingtip to wingtip. It is a peacetime measure to prevent sabotage. It is a wartime suicide pact. Among the rows of modern P-40 Warhawks, there are older planes, the P-36As, the ones sent here to retire, the ones the Army didn't want. When the first Japanese bomb hits the hangar, the world explodes. Fire, shrapnel, chaos. Men run onto the tarmac in their underwear. They are screaming. They are dying. But amidst the inferno, a few engines cough to life. Second Lieutenant Philip Rasmussen wakes up to the sound of explosions. He runs out of the barracks. He is wearing his purple silk pajamas. He straps on a .45 pistol and sprints for the flight line. He finds a P-36A that hasn't been hit. It is an obsolete plane. It has no armor plate. It has no self-sealing fuel tanks. The guns are not fully loaded. He doesn't care. He climbs in. The mechanic cranks the inertia starter. The radial engine catches. Rasmussen throttles up. He takes off down a runway that is being straved by Zeros. He lifts off into a sky filled with death. He is joined by 3 other P-36s. 4 obsolete fighters against the entire Imperial Japanese Navy. They climb into the clouds. They find the enemy. Nakajima B-5N Kate bombers, Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers, and the Mitsubishi A-6M Zero. The Zero is the best fighter in the Pacific. It is faster than the P-36. It turns just as well. It has cannons. But Rasmussen attacks. He charges a formation of bombers. His .30 caliber guns chatter. He sees pieces fly off a Japanese plane. Smoke trails. The bomber goes down. Confirmed kill. He turns. A Zero is on his tail. Cannon shells smash into his canopy. His radio explodes. His hydraulic lines are severed. The P-36 shakes like a leaf in a hurricane. But it keeps flying. The radial engine takes the punishment. The sturdy airframe holds together. Rasmussen dives into the clouds. He wrestles the crippled plane back to the airfield. He lands without brakes, without a tail wheel, with hundreds of bullet holes in the fuselage. He steps out of the cockpit, still wearing his purple pajamas. He is alive. The P-36 Hawk was the only American fighter to get airborne in significant numbers that day. It scored the first American kills of World War II. It proved that it could fight. It proved it was tough. But the narrative was already written. Pearl Harbor was a humiliation. The Army wanted new planes, faster planes. They wanted the P-47 Thunderbolt. They wanted the P-51 Mustang. The P-36 was quietly shuffled off the stage. The surviving planes were sent to training units. They were used to tow targets. They were forgotten. The American pilots moved on. They learned to fly the new machines. They looked forward to the day they would take the fight to the enemy. They assumed the P-36 was history, a footnote. They were wrong. Because while the P-36 was dying in America, it was being reborn in Africa. The Vichy French pilots were honing their skills. They were angry. They were humiliated by the defeat in 1940. They felt abandoned by the British. They felt pressured by the Germans. They had something to prove. And they had the Hawk. The stage is set for the ultimate irony. The year turns to 1942. The United States enters the war in Europe. The target is North Africa, Operation Torch. The Americans are coming to liberate the French. They expect to be welcomed as heroes. They expect the French to lay down their arms. They do not expect the Hawks to bite. But the pilots waiting on the airfields of Casablanca are not looking at the American flags on the approaching ships. They are looking at their orders. And their orders are clear. Defend the airspace. Engage all intruders. The intruders are flying Grumman Wildcats. The defenders are flying Curtiss Hawks. The family reunion is about to become a massacre. 04 hours, November 8, 1942. The coast of Morocco. The ocean is black. The horizon is invisible. 3,000 ships are cutting through the Atlantic swell. It is the largest amphibious invasion force in human history up to this point. Task Force 34. The Americans have arrived. On the flight deck of the USS Ranger, engines are turning over. Blue flames spit from exhaust stacks, licking the darkness. The smell of high-octane fuel is heavy in the salt air. The pilots of Fighting Squadron 9, VF-9, are strapping in. They are flying the Grumman F-4F-4 Wildcat. The Wildcat is the Navy's prize fighter. It is a tank with wings. It has armor plating, it has self-sealing tanks, it carries 6.50 caliber machine guns that can saw a target in half. The pilots are confident. They have been briefed on the opposition. The French, the intelligence officer said, they have old equipment, they have low morale, they probably won't even fight. It is a classic American mistake. It is the hubris of the giant looking down on the ant. They assume that because the French lost to Germany, they are weak. They assume that because the P-36 is old, it is toothless. They are about to learn a lesson in physics. 06 hours, Cazes Airfield, Casablanca. Inside the Vichy French briefing room, the mood is not one of surrender. It is one of cold, hard rage. These men are not Nazis. They are not fascists. They are patriots in a cage. For 2 years they have been humiliated. Their country is occupied. Their fleet was bombarded by the British at Mers el-Kebir while it sat at anchor. They do not trust the Allies. They view this invasion not as a liberation, but as another violation of French soil. The siren wails. Commandant Jean Toulon walks to the chalkboard. He does not give a speech about saving the world. He gives a speech about duty. Gentlemen, he says, we are soldiers. We have our orders. Defend the airfield. The pilots run to their machines. The Curtiss Hawk 75s are waiting. They are painted in desert camouflage, sand and spinach. But on the fuselage, the bright red and yellow stripes of the Vichy regime scream out. These are the same planes that fought the Luftwaffe in 1940. They are well maintained. The mechanics have polished the aluminum until it shines. But there is a ghost in the machine. The American pilots flying the Wildcats are used to fighting the Japanese Zero. They know the Zero is fast and agile, but fragile. They look at the Hawk 75 and they see a chunky, obsolete American export. They see a target practice drone. They do not realize that the Hawk 75 shares the Zero's most dangerous DNA: low wing loading, high power-to-weight ratio, sensitive controls. The Wildcat is a heavyweight boxer. It relies on a knockout punch. The Hawk is a knife fighter. It relies on getting in close and sliding the blade between the ribs. 07:15 hours. The merge. The sun is up. The sky is a brilliant, blinding blue. The Wildcats of VF-9 are prowling at 5,000 feet. They spot the bogies rising from the dust of Casablanca. "Tally-ho!" the flight leader calls. "Bandits at 3 o'clock low." They dive. The Americans expect the French to scatter. They expect them to run. Instead, the Hawks turn into the attack. The lead Wildcat pilot pulls lead on a Hawk. He fires. His tracers streak through the empty air. The Hawk isn't there anymore. The French pilot has flicked his wrist. The Hawk rolls instantaneously. It bites into the air and reverses direction in a maneuver that seems impossible for a metal object. The Wildcat pilot tries to follow. He yanks the stick back. But the Wildcat is heavy. The F4F4 model has folding wings, adding weight. It shudders, it groans, it cannot turn that tight. The Hawk slides onto the Wildcat's tail. This is the nightmare scenario. The American pilot looks back. He sees the distinct cowling of the Curtiss engine. He sees the muzzle flashes. The Hawk's machine guns are light, 7.5 millimeters. They don't have the devastating impact of the American .5 cals. But there are 4 of them, and the French pilots are surgeons. They aim for the oil coolers. They aim for the cockpit glass. Bullets hammer the Wildcat. The American plane smokes. The pilot dives, trying to use his weight to escape. The Hawk stays with him, glued to his 6 o'clock. It is a massacre of expectations. In the command centers on the ships, the radio traffic is chaotic. "I can't shake him! He's all over me! What are these things?" The things are the rejects, the failures. And they are winning. By the end of the first wave, the score is shocking. 7 American aircraft are down. Wildcats, dauntless dive bombers, even spotter planes. The Vichy Hawks are swarming like angry wasps. They are using the terrain. They are using the sun. Let's look at the physics of this failure. Why is the obsolete plane beating the modern plane? It comes down to wing loading. This is the ratio of the plane's weight to the surface area of its wings. The F4F Wildcat has a wing loading of roughly 26 pounds per square foot. It is heavy. It needs speed to stay in the air. The P-36 Hawk has a wing loading of only 23 pounds per square foot. That difference sounds small. It is not. It means the Hawk can fly slower without stalling. It means it can turn in a tighter circle. In a low-speed dogfight, which is exactly what happens over the airfield, the Wildcat is a brick. The Hawk is a feather. The American pilots are trying to fight a turning war against a plane designed to turn. They are playing the enemy's game. But there is another factor, the human factor. The French pilots are flying for their lives. They are flying over their own base. If they bail out, they land on friendly ground. The Americans are flying over hostile territory. If they bail out, they are captured. That psychological edge makes the French aggressive. They push the Hawks to the breaking point. 0830 hours, the second wave. The Americans realize they have a problem. The cakewalk is a bloodbath. They change tactics. They stop trying to dogfight. They call in the reinforcements, the P-40 Warhawks. This is the moment of ultimate irony. The P-40 is the successor to the P-36. It is the better version. It is the plane the Army wanted. Now, the father is about to fight the son. The P-40s arrive from the carrier Chenango and from captured airfields. They are faster. They have heavier guns. But the Hawks are still dangerous. A flight of P-40s engages a flight of Hawks. The silhouettes are almost identical. The wings are the same. The tails are the same. The only difference is the nose. The P-40 has a chin scoop. The Hawk has a round nose. In the confusion of combat, identification is impossible. American pilots hesitate. Is that a P-40? Is that a friend? The French do not hesitate. They see the star on the wing. They fire. One P-40 pilot, Lieutenant Colonel John C. "Red" Horton, finds himself in a turning fight with a Hawk. He is in a superior machine. He has more horsepower. But he cannot get a bead on the French plane. The Hawk dances away. It loops over him. Horton is forced to dive away, full throttle, leaving the fight. He returns to base, shaking his head. That pilot, he reports, could fly a bathtub if you put wings on it. The battle rages for 3 days. The sky over Casablanca is a graveyard of aluminum. The failed fighter has proven its point. It has taken a toll in blood. But the clock is ticking. The French are running out of ammo. They are running out of fuel. And the Americans have something the French do not: numbers. Endless, overwhelming numbers. For every wildcat that smokes and crashes into the sea, 2 more take its place. For every Hawk that goes down, there is no replacement. The factory in Buffalo is not sending spare parts to Vichy, France. The impossible moment is ending. The weight of industrial warfare is crushing the tactical brilliance of the Hawk pilots. But before the guns go silent, there is one final, tragic twist waiting in the wings. A twist that involves the very men who designed the plane. The investigation is about to begin. The Americans will capture the airfield. They will walk up to the bullet-riddled Hawks. And they will find something in the cockpits that will make their blood run cold. 10 hours, November 11, 1942. Cazes Airfield, Casablanca. The noise stops. For 3 days, the air has been torn apart by the scream of radial engines and the rattle of machine guns. Now there is only the wind blowing off the Atlantic and the crackle of cooling metal. The ceasefire has been signed. Admiral Jean Darlan, the Vichy commander, has ordered his forces to stand down. The torch is no longer burning. The invasion is over. The occupation begins. American jeeps roll onto the tarmac at Cazes. They weave between the craters. They dodge the debris. The GIs step out. Their boots crunch on glass. They grip their Thompson submachine guns, eyes scanning the hangars. They expect a trap. They expect the French to start shooting again. But the French pilots are standing by their planes. Their flight suits are stained with sweat and oil. Their faces are gaunt. They light cigarettes with shaking hands. They do not look like enemies. They look like men who have just survived a shipwreck. An American mechanic walks up to one of the Vichy fighters. He runs his hand along the fuselage. He traces the line of bullet holes. Holes made by American guns. He stops at the engine cowling. He looks closely. There is a small metal plate riveted to the aluminum. It is covered in desert dust. He wipes it with his thumb. The text is stamped in English. Manufactured by Curtiss Wright Corporation. Buffalo, New York, USA. The mechanic spits on the ground. "Well, I'll be damned," he mutters. "We built the gun that shot us." This is the surreal aftermath of the battle. The Americans are now standing face to face with their own technology, modified by war, flown by men they thought were allies, then enemies, and now allies again. The tension is thick enough to choke on. The American pilots from the USS Ranger come ashore. They want to meet the men who shot them down. They want to see the ghosts that outturned their wildcats. The conversation is awkward. It is conducted in broken English and broken French. "You fly good," an American says, pointing to the Hawk. "The machine is good," the French pilot replies. He pats the wing. "She is forgiving." They walk around the aircraft. They count the damage. One Hawk has taken 50 hits and is still flyable. The radial engine is a mess of severed wires and dented cylinders. But it still turns over. The Americans are impressed. They realize that the failure of 1938 is actually a survivor. But there is a cost to this survival. The French pilots are exhausted. They have lost friends. They have shot down Americans, men who came to liberate them. The psychological toll is heavy. They were soldiers following orders, trapped between the German hammer and the American anvil. And now the script flips again. The Vichy markings are stripped off. The red and yellow stripes are painted over. The French roundel remains, but now it fights for the Free French. The P-36 Hawks of Africa are pressed back into service. They will not fight Americans anymore. They will patrol the convoys. They will hunt German U-boats. They will finish the war on the right side. But while the African chapter of the P-36 closes, another chapter is already written in blood on the other side of the world. A chapter that is colder, darker, and even more deadly. To understand the true lethality of this machine, we have to leave the heat of Morocco. We have to go north, to the Arctic Circle, to the frozen forests of Finland. The Eastern Front, 1941-1944. The Continuation War. The Germans were smart. When they captured those hundreds of French Hawk 75s in 1940, they didn't just let them rot. They looked at the map. They looked at their allies. Finland was fighting for its life against the Soviet Union. The Finns needed planes. They didn't care if they were old. They didn't care if they were rejects. They needed anything that could fly and shoot. So, Germany sold the captured French Hawks to Finland. 44 of them. They were crated up, shipped via Norway, and assembled in the biting cold of the Finnish winter. If the American Army thought the P-36 was a failure in the mild climate of Louisiana, they should have seen it in Karelia. The temperature drops to 40 below zero. Oil turns into sludge. Rubber snaps like glass. Hydraulic fluid freezes solid. Most planes die here. The Spitfire struggled. The Hurricane froze. But the P-36? The P-36 loved the cold. The radial engine, the one Donovan Berlin chose for its ruggedness, was perfect. It didn't have a radiator to freeze. It warmed up quickly. The Finns called it the Susu, sweetheart. They painted a new insignia on the side, the blue swastika, the Finnish Air Force symbol, unrelated to the Nazis, and they went hunting. The enemy here is not the Wildcat, it is the Red Air Force. Swarms of Polikarpov I-153 biplanes, fast monoplane I-16 Ratas, and eventually the British Hurricanes and American P-39s sent to Russia via Lend-Lease. The Finns are outnumbered 10-1, but the Finns have a secret weapon. They are the best winter pilots in the world, and they have the perfect tool for the job. The Hawk 75 becomes a legend in the north. The Finnish pilots discover that the sensitive controls, which the Americans found twitchy, allow them to aim with surgical precision. They discover that the lightweight fuselage allows them to operate from frozen lakes and improvised runways packed down with snow. The kill ratios are staggering. While the Americans at Pearl Harbor got 2 kills and the Vichy French got 7 kills in Africa, the Finns turned the Hawk into a weapon of mass destruction. Between 1941 and 1944, Finnish pilots flying the P-36 Hawk scored 190 confirmed victories. They lost only 15 aircraft in combat. That is a kill ratio of over 12-1. Let that sink in. The plane that the U.S. Army rejected as unfit for combat achieved a 12-1 kill ratio against the Soviet Air Force. Men like Kyosty Karhila became aces in the Hawk. They flew it until the wings were literally falling off. And that brings us to the cost, the mechanical cost. The Finns had no spare parts. The factory in Buffalo was closed to them. They were fighting on the Axis side. America was the enemy. So they improvised. When a Wright Cyclone engine died, they didn't have a replacement. So they scavenged engines from shot-down Soviet bombers. They fitted Russian engines into American airframes. When the guns jammed, they rebored them to fire German ammunition. When the radios failed, they used hand signals. The Hawk became a Frankenstein monster, a mix of American aluminum, Russian horsepower, and Finnish grit. It was ugly, it was battered, it was covered in soot and oil, but it was lethal. In one engagement, a flight of Hawks jumped a formation of Soviet P-2 bombers. The bombers were faster on paper, but the Hawks doved from high altitude, screaming down until the airframes groaned. They slashed through the formation, guns blazing. 3 bombers went down in flames. The Hawks climbed back up untouched. This is the ultimate vindication of the design. The P-36 was not a bad plane. It was a plane that required a specific kind of pilot. It needed a pilot who didn't rely on technology to save him. It needed a pilot who could feel the edge of the stall, who could aim with his eyes, not a computer. The Finns were those pilots. But by 1944, time had finally run out. The war was turning. The Soviets were pushing back with massive numbers. They were flying the new La-5 and Yak-9 fighters. The Hawk was finally, truly obsolete. The Finns retired them. They parked them in the forests. They covered them with branches. The war ended. The silence returned. The P-36 had fought on both sides. It had defended Pearl Harbor. It had defended France. It had attacked Americans in Africa. It had defended Finland against Russia. It was a mercenary, a traitor, a hero, a survivor. But as the dust settled on World War II, a question remained. The U.S. Army Air Corps had dismissed it. They had bet everything on the P-40, the P-47, the P-51. Were they right? Or did they throw away a weapon that could have saved thousands of American lives in the early days of the war? The investigation files are closed. The wreckage is rusted. But we have the flight logs. We have the combat reports. And in the final section, we are going to put the P-36 on trial. We are going to answer the question, was the failure actually the greatest missed opportunity of the war? 1946. The Scrapyards of Europe. The war is over. The silence is absolute. In vast, muddy fields across France, Germany, and North Africa, the machines of war are gathered to die. It is a graveyard of giants. Tanks with shattered turrets, bombers with broken spines, and fighters, thousands of fighters. The smelters are burning day and night. The world needs aluminum to rebuild. It needs pots, pans, and siding for houses. So the cranes lift the warbirds. The crushers scream. Into the furnace goes the Messerschmitt. Into the furnace goes the Spitfire. And into the furnace goes the Curtiss P-36 Hawk. As the metal melts into a silver river, the identity of the machine is erased. It doesn't matter anymore if it fought for the U.S. Army, the Vichy French, the Finns, or the Nazis. It is just metal. The traitor plane is finally purified by fire. But before the last Hawk disappears into history, we have to open the dossier one last time. We have to look at the ledger. We have to answer the question that has haunted aviation historians for 80 years. Was the P-36 a failure? The United States Army Air Corps said yes. They said it was too slow. They said it was undergunned. They replaced it with the P-40 Warhawk as fast as they could. But the evidence suggests that the Army was looking at the wrong numbers. They were obsessed with top speed. In 1938, the doctrine was pursuit. The job of a fighter was to catch enemy bombers. Speed was God. The P-36 topped out around 300 to 310 miles per hour. The P-40 could do 350. The P-51 could do 440. By that metric, the Hawk was a turtle. But war is not a drag race. War is a knife fight in a phone booth. The pilots who actually flew the Hawk, the French over the Ardennes, the Finns over the ice, the Vichy pilots over Casablanca, knew a different truth. They knew that maneuverability is a weapon. Let's look at the zero paradox. The Japanese Mitsubishi A6M-0 was the terror of the Pacific. Why? Not because it was fast. It wasn't that fast. It was terrifying because it could turn. It could climb. It had incredible range. The U.S. Navy spent 2 years trying to figure out how to beat it. They had to invent new tactics, the thatch weave, because their Wildcats and P-40s could not turn with the Zero. Here is the tragedy. The United States already had a plane that could turn with the Zero. They had it in 1938, the P-36 Hawk. If the pilots at Pearl Harbor or the Philippines had been flying upgraded P-36s, perhaps with better guns and self-sealing tanks, but keeping that lightweight airframe, the early air war might have looked very different. Instead of being slaughtered in turning fights they couldn't win, American pilots might have met the Japanese on equal terms. The P-36 had the same wing loading as the Zero. It had the same sensitive handling. It was the American Zero, and we threw it away. The verdict of the aces. The numbers do not lie. A bad plane does not create aces. A bad plane does not survive 4 years of combat on the Eastern Front. The finish record is the smoking gun. 190 kills, 15 losses. That is a 12-to-1 kill ratio. That is better than the P-38 Lightning, better than the Spitfire in many theaters. How did they do it? They used the P-36's faults as strengths. The engine wasn't the most powerful? Fine, it was reliable. It started when it was minus 40 degrees. The controls were too sensitive? Fine, that meant you could aim faster than the enemy. The guns were light? Fine, you just had to get closer. The P-36 was not a plane for a rookie. It was a plane for a virtuoso. The U.S. Army wanted a plane that anyone could fly, a truck. The P-40 was a truck. The P-47 was a truck. The P-36 was a sports car. And in the hands of the Finns and the French, it was a Ferrari. The legacy of betrayal. But the story of the P-36 is not just about specs. It is about the strange, twisted path of weapons in a global war. No other fighter in history has such a complex resume of betrayal. It was designed to defend America. It was sold to France to fight Germany. It was captured by Germany to fight Russia. It was used by Vichy France to fight America. Think about the pilot in the Wildcat over Casablanca. He was shot down by a machine built in his own country. The aluminum was mined in Arkansas. The steel was forged in Pennsylvania. The engine was built in New Jersey. Every rivet, every bolt, every wire was American. But the finger on the trigger was French. And the orders came from a government collaborating with Berlin. It is the ultimate proof that a weapon has no morality. A fighter plane does not have a conscience. It does not know who is flying it. It does not know what flag is painted on its wing. It only knows physics: lift, drag, thrust, gravity. The P-36 Hawk was a faithful servant to whoever sat in the cockpit. It didn't care if it was shooting down a Heinkel bomber or a Grumman Wildcat. It just did what it was built to do. It fought. The final twist. Donovan Berlin, the man who designed it, watched all of this from his office in Buffalo. He saw his creation rejected. He saw it praised abroad. He saw it turn on its masters. But he didn't stop. He took the fuselage of the P-36, he strengthened the spars, he moved the radiator, he installed the Allison V-12 engine, and he created the P-40 Warhawk. The P-40 went on to become the workhorse of the war. The Flying Tigers used it. The British used it in the desert. The Russians used it. 13,000 P-40s were built. But underneath the skin, deep in the DNA of the airframe, the P-40 was just a P-36 with a nose job. The failure was the father of the success. Without the P-36, there is no P-40. Without the lessons learned from the Hawk, the landing gear, the wing structure, the manufacturing techniques, Curtiss Wright would never have been able to arm the Allies. The conclusion. Today, only a handful of P-36 Hawks survive in museums. They sit quietly in the dark. Most visitors walk past them. They look for the Mustang. They look for the Spitfire. They see the Hawk and think, just another old plane. They don't see the blood on the hands. They don't hear the wind whistling over the Atlas Mountains. They don't feel the biting cold of the Finnish winter. The Curtiss P-36 Hawk was the underdog, the reject, the traitor. It was the American fighter that fought for the enemy. And in doing so, it taught us a lesson that military planners still forget today. Technology is not everything. You can have the fastest plane, the biggest gun, and the most expensive radar. But if you underestimate your enemy, if you dismiss a weapon because it doesn't fit your spreadsheet, and if you forget that there is a human being in the cockpit, you will lose. The American pilots over Casablanca learned that lesson the hard way. They looked down on the Hawk, and the Hawk looked back and pulled the trigger. 1942, Casablanca. The sun sets over the airfield. The wrecks are still smoking. A Vichy pilot walks away from his P-36. He pats the fuselage one last time. He survives the war. He never speaks of it again. But in his dreams, he is always turning tight, turning inside the enemy, flying the machine that no one wanted and making it the deadliest thing in the sky. This is the file. This is the truth.